How are you guys all doing? Welcome into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege. Yes, if you've noticed, I'm in a new location. I'd like to keep you guys on your toes a little bit when I'm doing this show, switch it around a little bit. Maybe only for Wednesdays I'm going to be in this location. But on today's show, anyway, I'm going to be talking about a lot of interesting stuff. Obviously, the biggest news breaking today on Stefon Diggs and the trade. I'm going to give you guys my reactions to that a little bit later on in the show. I'm also going to start off with the Los Angeles Chargers and what they plan on doing with that number 5 overall pick and how it might not be so obvious what they're going to do with the pick after so much speculation and anticipation over what's going to happen with that. I'm going to get into that, as well as giving you guys my predictions on 4 new playoff teams that I think we could be seeing in the playoffs next season. All of that and more on today's show, so stick around. You're not going to want to miss any of that stuff. Before I start on the first segment, as always, please like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, as well as the channel itself. And one last reminder, if you have any questions, comments, or anything like that, please make sure to use the tip and donations link running across the ticker below with any questions or comments that you may have. I'm able to read your question on air, and we could have a discussion, take the conversation elsewhere. It makes it more fun, a bit more engaging for me, and I think everybody watching the show. So if you're able to do that, a big thank you to you. Again, the tip and donations link is GSMCpodcast.net. So moving on to the first topic of the day, surrounding the Chargers and what they're going to do with that number 5 overall pick. It's interesting because all you really hear nowadays is the Chargers talking about, or analysts talking about the Chargers, that number 5 pick. It's looking to be a receiver, or the Chargers are going to go most likely offense, right? Justin Herbert, all of his weapons are now gone. His weapons that he threw to last year aren't all there. Eckler, Keenan Allen, and all those players are now gone. You look at what they've done so far in free agency, they've really just done a lot of housekeeping so far in free agency, fixing their salary cap, trying to get the best players to stay and cutting ties with others. Keenan Allen, like I mentioned already, Eckler, some of those guys. They were able to keep Bosa and Khalil Mack, which is good. I think it's what Jim Harbaugh wants to do. But anyway, looking at this Chargers pick now at number 5, it's seriously put more into question, at least for me, reading all the reports and other news that I've seen come out around the Chargers, is that based on what Jim Harbaugh is as a coach, based on what people know about him, looking at his Michigan team and looking at his identity that he wants to build with this team, a lot of it is built through the trenches. A lot of it is beating people up, physical, owning the game, controlling the game that way. The running game is a big part of that. And now you look at the number 5 pick, and the way Jim Harbaugh spoke about the O-line at the NFL coaches meeting, I think says a lot more than people really realize. At the annual meeting, Jim Harbaugh said, "If I asked you the question of what position group depends on no other position group to be good, but every other position group depends on them to be good, what position group is that? Offensive line." And I've never really seen him speak so highly of the offensive line so far in just this offseason. Yeah, he keeps it lighthearted, he jokes around a lot, but he seemed very serious when he said that statement. And offensive line is a big part of, obviously, the success of all of these teams. The best teams have great offensive lines, and it lines up with what Jim Harbaugh, his identity is. And just on that, looking at the Chargers offensive line last year, you say that, yeah, the offensive line's important, but the weapons are equally as important for Justin Herbert, your franchise quarterback. That makes sense. Looking at the Chargers just last season, they were pretty good in pass protection. Justin Herbert only sacked 29 times, ranked 3rd or 23rd in the NFL. Rushing yards weren't really there. That's really where the caveat is in all of this, the kind of coach that Jim Harbaugh is. You see the rush yards last year for the Chargers, and I think that's a big point of emphasis that Jim Harbaugh wants to switch up here. In rushing alone last year, they had only 1,642 yards. That was 25th in the NFL. Less than 100 yards per game on average. And it goes without saying all the struggles that Austin Eckler had, not only through injury of himself and his own, fault in that and his own contributions to that, missing time and not really gaining a rhythm, but a majority of that is that offensive line. He was their leading rusher, and he had 628 yards as their lead back. That ranked 38th in the league, guys. 38th for your lead running back that missed a lot of time. You're not going to get anywhere with those sort of numbers, honestly, in reality, with the kind of competition that there is in the AFC. As well, you look at Michigan with Jim Harbaugh just this past season. Blake Corum was 7th in rushing attempts at 258, led all of college football with 27 rushing touchdowns. And when you look at Michigan and the way that they're built, their offensive line is huge. Their offensive line is an actual, quite literal wall that teams, defenses can't get past. They're maulers. They move well in space, and they created a lot of holes for Blake Corum, and just how well and how successful that team was. Not to mention their defensive line as well was one of the best in all of college football. So both of those lines, there's a reason why those players are spoken so highly of around draft circles and around team circles. Just a lot of anticipation and praise for those guys for what they did. And it was deserved for how they all played out, and they won the national championship and all of that. But the biggest thing is to remember here, I don't think it's so cut and dry. I know Herbert needs a weapon, and I know Justin Herbert, you think about him, just now that I brought it up, if you go offensive line, if you're Justin Herbert, are you questioning that a little bit? Thinking about it, if I'm Justin Herbert, I want weapons. I want someone to throw the ball to, but at the same time, it's still helping you with the offensive line at number 5, or if they trade back a little bit and still get another prospect that they really like. There's a bit of good and bad with it. I'm interested to see what he would react to. It is a good question just because it's positive either way, but it's positive if you already have good wide receivers and you draft O-line, no one's saying anything. If you have a great O-line and you draft a receiver, no one's saying anything either. So that's where right now I'm thinking of if I'm Justin Herbert. Also, they have the number 5 pick, and the best offensive line prospect that's been touted so far has been Joe Alt. And all the mock drafts, if you go out there and see them, look for them, most of them have Joe Alt going no earlier really than number 7 for the Tennessee Titans. They also need offensive line help, so that makes sense. Like I mentioned, everyone thinks the Chargers are going wide receiver, but the way Jim Harbaugh speaks about it, what if Joe Alt is taking number 5? Is that too high for Joe Alt? I don't know how people view him, if they think top 5 is too high for him. In my opinion, I don't think really any pick is too early for an offensive lineman. They are so pivotal in the success of these teams. I agree with Jim Harbaugh, but I agree because most teams have wide receivers, have weapons. No team has the level of wide receivers that the Chargers currently do right now. And number 5, to pick Joe Alt would affect a lot of things. Then you look at the Tennessee Titans, what they would do in case Joe Alt isn't there. Would they move back? Or would it make sense for the Chargers just to move back? Maybe they don't like Joe Alt. Maybe they like another prospect, and this makes it better for them to trade back from number 5 to, say, 11, 12 with the Broncos or the Minnesota Vikings with that pick. They could still get a Talise Fuaga or a Troy Fatano from Washington. If they like one of those two guys better, it makes sense, and I think it would work out better for them, but, they might like Joe Alt. And if they could get him at 5, no one before them is going to take him most likely, unless another team trades up, but that would be most likely for a quarterback. So they could take him at number 5, and that would be fine, but there is just those other thoughts that come into your head of, well, when are you going to address wide receiver? I actually saw a mock draft today that had them trading back with I want to say it was the Arizona Cardinals. Or no, it was the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings, they traded both of their picks away. They move back to number 11, get one of those tackles that I mentioned, and they still get the 23rd pick where they can draft another wide receiver. I thought that was a great idea. If it works out like that, that would be the best case scenario, in my opinion. And the last thing I will say is, if they don't do that and draft Joe Alt at number 5, their general manager, Joe Ortiz, has said that he expects a big second-year leap from their rookie wide receiver last season, Quentin Johnson, out of TCU. A lot was said about him coming into the draft. He was one of the highly rated receivers. Didn't really work out for him in his first year. He had a lot of drops and not a lot of positives. A lot of learning came from that first season, but he didn't really show out like all other wide receivers tend to surprise in their first season. Not to say that he can't, but he hasn't proven it. So what are you going to base the thought off of? If he hasn't proven it, you're still hoping to see it. He hasn't shown you any real flashes, maybe in practice or something like that, but in the games, in my opinion, from watching the Chargers a good amount, he didn't really pop out too much in separation, catches, creating space between a cornerback. Those sort of things I didn't really see from him, but there could be a second-year jump. I just don't know if the Chargers are willing to gamble all of that on just hoping that it happens for him. And even still, if he has a monster year, they still would need a few more weapons, I would hope, for Justin Herbert to throw the ball around. They can't just run it the whole game with Gus Edwards, and he isn't the greatest running back, so again, you might need somebody else to spot Gus Edwards and come in for him, and you might need a running back room to really blossom that running game. A lot of options still left on the table for the Chargers to figure out. It seems like Jim Harbaugh wants to build this offensive lineup and build this offense through the run. It makes sense because Justin Herbert's thrown a lot, but right now there is more questions and a lot more hoping and guessing than there are solid answers. That'll all play out over the course of these next few 2 to 3 weeks. It's going to be fascinating to see how it plays out. I'm sure Jim Harbaugh won't be shy about keeping it entertaining, but that is all in development as of right now. But in the meantime, we're going to move on with the show. And moving on with the show, I have a lot more to talk about. I mentioned the Stefon Diggs trade I'm going to get into. That's towards the end of the show. On the other side of the break, I'm going to talk about the Baltimore Ravens and John Harbaugh this time and how he is actually welcoming the input of his star quarterback, Lamar Jackson, with any ideas that Lamar might have in regards to the NFL draft coming up in just a few weeks. Stick around to find out what John Harbaugh said and what Lamar Jackson can bring to the table in terms of the NFL draft. That and much more coming on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the other Harbaugh brother, this time John Harbaugh and the Baltimore Ravens, more so on Lamar Jackson and the NFL draft. at the NFL annual meeting for all the coaches and owners and where everybody is down in Orlando, Florida. They asked John Harbaugh about Lamar Jackson and his input with the draft, how much he's involved in it, how much does he think that's okay going forward or so far in their time together. John Harbaugh was actually pretty open to it and openly admitted that he said he's looking at guys now. He and I agree on a few guys. We haven't disagreed on anybody yet. We're sharing our vision together. And I thought that was really interesting because Lamar seems to be very involved already. He's always talking up about this team. He's always seemed pretty positive about them and where they're going and really believing in this offense that Baltimore has building. A lot of questions around receivers and a lot of criticism on Lamar Jackson also for his throwing and how much they throw the ball in compared to how much they run it. But I think this is really great to see and something that I don't know if other quarterbacks are involved. I'm sure some of the top guys are involved or their organizations ask them for their opinion. I'm not too sure how many guys are openly getting involved as much as Lamar Jackson is, just based on the report that came out. Sources say that Lamar was starting to get involved in some aspect back in 2022, breaking down a lot of South Florida wide receivers and going to their general manager, Eric DeCosta, with his notes, all these notes that he took on all these guys. And later that year, this was back in 2022, they drafted the Fort Lauderdale native, Zay Flowers, in that draft. You know how all that turned out. Zay Flowers is a very solid option for Lamar Jackson in Baltimore right now. He had a very impressive season last year, admittedly, and I think he has been one of their better wide receivers that they've drafted. Rashad Bateman started that way, but now he's kind of been in and out with injuries, or they don't really throw the ball already as it is, so he hasn't really gotten the chance to show out as much. And Zay Flowers, I think, just brings a little bit more of a dynamic aspect to this offense. He's more exciting in some way because he's quicker. He gets in and out of his breaks better. And all of that, you don't want to say it all came from Lamar Jackson. I'm sure the Ravens scout team and general managers and coaches were already looking at wide receivers and might have already pointed out Zay Flowers. But the fact that Lamar took the time, took the notes, went back and watched tape on all these receivers and how they would fit into this scheme, I think says a lot about Lamar and how this organization is really built, and one aspect of how they've been able to keep so much success going forward because of John Harbaugh and keeping that open, neutral availability with his players and just being very open with them and taking in their input, potentially open to changes in schemes and plays and stuff like that. That sort of transparency is my biggest thing in seeing it in an organization. Why not just the Ravens, but that whole division really in the AFC North is very good and so competitive. They're a big part of that for the last few years. They're going to continue to be successful if they do this, and a lot of coaches wouldn't do this. A lot of coaches aren't open to changing schemes, aren't open to player opinions. You know, it's this system and that's it. We're going to live and die by this. You don't want to point fingers or blame anybody for, being bad, but just the way it all broke down in Denver, a lot of reports said that Sean Payton was very adamant about doing things his way. It was his way or the highway. A lot of people inside the organization really wouldn't go up to him and suggest a change. You saw the relationship he had with Russell Wilson and the way sometimes he talked to him on the sidelines, the way he coached them up. You don't want to say, or I don't want to say that he felt above everybody, but it just gives off that impression a little bit that if people aren't agreeing with you, that nothing will work and you can't come to a compromise. It doesn't look great from that point. So that's another aspect of it, the other side of the spectrum. And if it continues to go this way, I think for the Ravens, it would only get better. They're going to need it to go better because they've lost a lot of players in free agency, not to mention the offensive line, losing 3 to 2 starters already. But They also lost Odell Beckham Jr. He's technically still a free agent. He could come back, but it's not really trending that way. Devin Duvernay is another one that they lost. I want to say he signed with the Jaguars. I know he signed somewhere else. I'm not 100% sure if it's the Jaguars. He's definitely gone. I mentioned Bateman. He's coming up on a negotiating period next year, I want to say. So that's another one where you're not really in risk of losing him. You're still going to negotiate and go over everything, but at the same time, he could be on the way out. So then that really leaves you only with Zay Flowers, and now you got to look at your options, and this is where Lamar comes in and getting more involved this year. I'm assuming they have more picks this year, pick 30, 62, 93 to name a few of them, and just over the course of their recent history, they haven't been so successful with drafting wide receivers. And it's a good thing, I guess, Lamar did come in, because before this, they've drafted 7 wide receivers over the last 6 years. And I couldn't name too many that they've drafted that are still with them right now, as of today, April 3rd, 2024. The only one is Zay Flowers from last year, Lamar Jackson suggesting him. Again, their scouts and their team might have already been on it, but you can connect the dots there a little bit with Lamar Jackson getting involved, and maybe he was very adamant about drafting Zay Flowers. Maybe he really liked him, and he was his number one guy, and they ended up trusting Lamar with that and going that way. It turned out very well for him. So now, that voice from Lamar Jackson in those conference rooms, maybe if he's in there, chiming in on these draft discussions, maybe becomes louder. People hear him a lot more and trust him a lot more with these decisions, because ultimately it is gonna be down to him and how he uses all these draft prospects. More than likely, they're gonna be on offense. So it's really just gonna come down to him. He's the whole engine, the pivotal point of this whole team organization. He is the face of the Baltimore Ravens, and how far he goes, how far he takes this team is how successful they're going to be. They're going to try to do everything to help him. They bring in Derrick Henry definitely doesn't hurt, but again, he is the whole thing that makes everything go smoothly. John Harbaugh also talked about it, mentioning or answering a question on how Derrick Henry might change this offense and how he might consider making him the pivotal point of it. He stated that, Derrick Henry coming in is going to create some change. He said, and we'll want to know what he thinks. I believe he'll be a big part of the architecture of this offense, speaking of Lamar and Derrick Henry. But ultimately, he went on and said that, Derrick Henry coming in is going to change. He is open to that change. He wants this offense to evolve. If it's not evolving, he believes they're not doing their job right and that they're not really getting better. But he still stressed that this is going as far as Lamar goes. He is the pivotal point of it. And, he said more on Lamar Jackson. He'll come back, he'll look at everything, and we'll know what he thinks. I think that's great. More teams and more general managers should do this, or it should be brought to light more often that, Patrick Mahomes is chiming in on this, or Joe Burrow suggested we go this way. I think for right now, it's still seen as, it's like a bit of a surprise. When a coach says it, everyone kind of takes it like, oh, wow, like they're really doing that? All right, well, hopefully it turns out well for them. Whereas all these quarterbacks are really the face of their team. If you have a top 5, top 7 quarterback right now, you're most likely one of the best teams in the NFL, and you're making that whole team go, like I said with Lamar. So I don't think it even should be much of a surprise when Joe Burrow says, hey, I think we should go Jamar Chase and draft him instead of Penei Sewell. Could that have happened? Maybe. It wasn't really reported, but that could have happened, and look how well it turned out. If you're Justin Herbert, you say coming up in this year, I want this receiver, or I trust you guys, let's go offensive line. And then you go that way and you live and die with that decision, because they are such a pivotal point and they should be brought in more into these discussions, into these conversations. I'm always surprised when I talked about this a few days ago now. I think it was this week. Matt LaFleur, the coach of the Green Bay Packers, said he was surprised and caught off guard when they released Aaron Jones, they signed Josh Jacobs, and that whole process went down. It is different because we're talking about the coach, but I'm always surprised when I see that everybody in an organization is sort of divided, or there is just a lost communication out there between general manager, owner, coach, even quarterback now. He should be involved, whoever he is, in those conversations. I think they should just get together and get a conversation going and talk about these big decisions. Only the caveat is, again, if you have one of those top quarterbacks. You're not doing this with every quarterback. I want to make sure that's clear. But when you have a Joe Burrow, a Herbert, a Josh Allen, especially now that Stefon Diggs was traded, you have to ask him and you have to get his input, and everybody coming together to make those decisions, I think will end up benefiting the team a lot more. And again, with this going forward, not to say that the Packers aren't doing that in other aspects, but that just caught me off guard, and it relates to this because the Ravens are so open to letting their players give inputs. They're open to change, and I think that's the best situation and why Lamar's been able to get better over these past few seasons. He struggled, like most rookies do in his first season, but he's gotten better. The communication's been better. The relationship's been just growing with John Harbaugh. You see it out on the field, and you're going to continue to see it going forward with the Baltimore Ravens. I love what I'm seeing. Who they're going to get at 30, that's the next question. Receiver, like I mentioned. Offensive line, I think, is my preference if I'm in there and I'm part of the conversations, if they want to include me in those conversations. I'll tell them it's offensive line just because they've lost Kevin Zeitler. Morgan Moses was traded. John Simpson was also now ended up on the Jets. So I think it's really a no-brainer to go offensive line. If you want to get the most out of Derrick Henry, you got to give him a good offensive line. He's talented enough to kind of hide those blemishes, but if you want to get back to where you were, compete with the Chiefs, the Texans now in the AFC, and everybody really in that conference, you're going to have a solid O-line to get the best out of your stars. And if they don't get a top-end wide receiver, they're going to have to depend more on that running attack anyway. So I think offensive line benefits the pass if they get a receiver down the line, or benefits Derrick Henry in the system that they're already running. All of that surrounding the draft and the Ravens and Lamar, good for the Ravens to keep on doing this. And I'm always pushing for more player involvement in these sort of decisions in organizations. I don't think you can get any better input from anybody else in terms of players and just strategy and just being out there on the field other than your top player, being a quarterback, running back, whoever it is. I think it's always beneficial getting their input. But anyway, moving on with the show and the next topic, I'm going to send it to a quick break right now. And on the other side of it, we're going to get into my 4 new teams that I think are going to be in the playoffs this year. 4 new teams means I'm going to be taking 4 out who made the playoffs last year. So stick around to find out who's in and who's out of the playoffs, in my opinion, as well as reacting to the Stefon Diggs trade that shocked the whole NFL world today. All of that coming up right after this break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube. Absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Thank you for joining me on the second half of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. before I jump into the third segment, I want to remind you guys one last time on today's show, if you have any questions or comments for me during this live show, use the tip and donations link, which is gsmcpodcast.net, there on your screen or running across the ticker down below. With any of your questions, doing this enables me to see your question pop up right away to my right in the chat box. We're able to have a conversation. I'm able to answer your questions on air, and it's more fun for me, in my opinion. It's a big help for the show, as well as the network and all the other shows running on it. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. Big thank you to you guys anytime you guys are able to use that with your questions or comments. But going back to that third segment, talking about playoff teams. We're a long way away from the playoffs. I do know that. But I think with so much change that's been going on in the NFL, a lot of trades. Just today there was a big one. And the free agent acquirements from other teams. The way that the draft is shaping up right now with all the rumors and everything shifting, it seems, every day. Thinking about who's going to make the playoffs came very hard to me when I decided to make these predictions. I saw other things where other people gave their inputs. Some people went 6 new teams that were going to make it. I stuck with 4 because, in all honesty, I don't think we're going to see much change. Because, funny enough, the good teams just got better, and the good teams from last year even got even better or got significantly worse. And that's where I kind of base my thought off of all of this, and just seeing how it all shaped up. I only could go 4. I couldn't go more than 4. So just to recap, last season, the teams that made the playoffs from each conference in the AFC, the Ravens were the 1 seed, the Bills were the 2, Kansas City at 3, the Texans were the 4, Cleveland was the 5 seed, the Dolphins were the 6 seed, and number 7 was the Pittsburgh Steelers. In the NFC, San Francisco was 1, Dallas was the number 2, Detroit was at 3, Tampa Bay was the number 4 seed, the Philadelphia Eagles were 5, then the Rams were 6, and the Green Bay Packers were 7. It came down to a tight race last season. I expect it to be the same this coming season, barring any huge catastrophic injury and everybody's healthy. I think it's extremely hard to decide who's going to be in the playoffs, and for me, there was 4 new ones. With 4 new ones coming in, 4 had to go out. And I think right now, in my estimation, the teams to drop out of the playoffs are going to have to be the Bills, the Cleveland Browns, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Los Angeles Rams. I was very close to going with the Dolphins and Dallas dropping out of the playoffs. It might be crazy to think that, because I know Dallas is still very good. The Dolphins are still very good. I couldn't get myself to drop the Dolphins just because after the trade news today, especially, I guess it's helped me today with Stefon Diggs moving on. The Dolphins are still probably the best team in that division. You could argue the Jets. I couldn't get myself to push them out of the playoffs. And with Dallas, I was really close. I haven't been a fan with what the Cowboys have been doing. That's been obvious. But, again, they still have Dak there. CeeDee's amazing. Michael Parsons is one of the best at his position. Trayvon Diggs is coming back. They have some of the best players at their position. So I have to see it for me to even believe it and predict that they're not going to make the playoffs. Because if they don't make the playoffs, oh my gosh, it's going to be like the end of the world for some people, and it's going to be like Christmas every day for another group of people. But those are the teams that I think are going to drop out of the playoffs. Again, it's extremely hard to determine who's going to make it and who's not. But the teams that are going to make the playoffs, that didn't make the playoffs last year, that I've been impressed with so far in free agency, we're going to start in the NFC. One team that's going to definitely make it, in my estimation, are the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings finished last year 7-10, and they had, a lot of people wouldn't notice because they lost Justin Jefferson. It wasn't great seeing them. Once they lost Kirk Cousins, you look at them and, you're not really knowing who you're watching out there. But last season, regardless of all those injuries and a roster that wasn't very convincing anyway. They had 5 games where they lost by no more than 5 points, 3 games where they lost only by 1 touchdown, and 2 games where they lost by 10 or more points. They were 7-10 last year, and if 8 of those games, regardless of the two that they lost by 10 plus, they deserve to lose those. But you have 8 games there. In the loss column where you lost 10, if 8 of them go your way, the ball bounces the right way, they win 5 more games, they're definitely in the playoffs, arguably over the Rams or potentially the Green Bay Packers, just with the better record in those games. So you have that already with a depleted roster last year. That gives me some hope that they're just going to get better, because they have gotten better. They've improved on defense with Jonathan Grenard, Alex Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman, and Jerry Tillery all coming over to fortify their defensive front, their front 7, I guess, including the linebackers. You only really need a stud, average, or a little bit better in the secondary. That's something they're going to have to address in the draft if they don't trade away all their first-round, second-round picks trying to move up for a quarterback. But that's another thing you need. Obviously, the quarterback, Sam Darnold's on the roster right now. You're not going to get too far with Sam Darnold, but, I say that. Most people believe that. But last year, they were extremely close with Josh Dobbs, and just a rotation of quarterbacks when Josh Dobbs got hurt. I'm pretty sure I remember for a game or two. So all of that, how could you not be at least optimistic about what the Dolphins have been doing? I love Brian Flores as their defensive coordinator. I think they're trending in the right direction. I truly believe that. Keeping Justin Jefferson is obviously huge. They're going to have to do that. They brought in Aaron Jones. They already have TJ Hawkinson, who's an absolute stud. Their offensive line is still solid. They have all the pieces. They just need the quarterback. I expect them to address that. And then, in a division where the Lions still have to figure out Amon-Ra St. Brown. They played them very well last year. You have the Packers as well, who are very young, impressive, but you can get a game or two there. Then you have the Chicago Bears, who also have gotten extremely better over the course of this free agency, but they're going to be young. There's not too much experience there. You're going to tell me you can't win one or sweep both of those games if you're the Minnesota Vikings? I'm very high on the Vikings. They had a very iffy record up and down season last year. Very unlucky. I think it goes more their way this year. I have them in the playoffs. I don't know what seed. I don't think they'll win the division. They're most likely going to be a wild card game, but I have them in there as my first team. The Atlanta Falcons are my next team. Similarly, I'm on the Atlanta Falcons bandwagon. I've stressed that their defense is the glaring need. I acknowledge that. I know that's where all the fingers will be pointed. But again, they finished 7-10 last year. With the addition now of Kirk Cousins, you're going to tell me that Kirk Cousins makes those mistakes that a Desmond Ridder or a Taylor Heineke made last year? I find that hard to believe. Even if Kirk is 70%, 60% at worst, not to throw too much shade on Heineke or Desmond Ridder, but I think you would take a 60-70% Kirk Cousins over what you got out of Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke last season. In reality, speaking truthfully, that's one thing. You had Bijan Robinson and Drake London last year, not really used to the best of their ability, and they both basically almost got over 1,000 yards rushing for Bijan and 1,000 yards receiving for Drake London. They were just under it, I'm sure, by no more than 80 yards for Drake London or no more than 50 or 60 yards for Bijan. So they're putting up those numbers already sort of handicapped with their offense and the kind of scheme and limit of talent that they were able to get out of from the quarterback position. And they had a great run game, but it just seemed you turn it on, you're looking at the games, the Falcons are in a close game. You tune in, and it's always like a mistake by Desmond Ridder, a bad read, a bad throw. He throws an interception, he gets sacked, and it kills the whole drive. And they end up losing those games, and you're not going to get that with a Kirk Cousins. Even if you have questions around his mobility, his health, I think that's still an improvement. I know they're going to address the defense in the draft and even more so in free agency. I'm liking what the Falcons are doing with a 7-10 record last year, I think that can only improve. In a weak division that it stands right now, the Bucs probably the best team from last year. They split a game with the Bucs, or at least played them close in both of those games. I like the Falcons to make the playoffs next season. Now in the AFC, this was pretty hard. In all honesty, this one might have been harder than the NFC, but I have to have the Cincinnati Bengals in there as one of the teams making it. Joe Burrow is simply the reason, and it's really the only reason anybody needs. I don't care what anybody says. Joe Burrow, when he's in there, it's a completely different team with the Cincinnati Bengals. Yeah, Jake Browning played all right. They have enough talent to kind of hide some of the mistakes maybe that he makes, but when Joe Burrow's in there, it almost seems to be very flawless. The biggest concerns around Joe Burrow was him getting hurt and the offensive line not really standing up to a lot of pressure that was brought onto Joe Burrow, and he's taking a lot of hits. He already throws the ball a lot, so he was getting injured. And the one season that he didn't get injured and he was healthy, he looked great in rhythm with everything. They made it to the Super Bowl. They almost won. Some people believe they could have won. But regardless of that, he makes a difference. He is one of those quarterbacks that, you always have a chance with if you're in the thick of it. And you have him, no one's going to not trust Joe Burrow with last 10 minutes, 5 minutes in the game. He changes everything. Even if their defense doesn't even have to be lights out, it has to be all right to just give him a chance. And more often than not, he'll come through with them. This could be the last year they have T. Higgins, so I think that's just more motivation for them to make the playoffs and give themselves the best chance if they're going to ultimately lose T. Higgins. So I love that for the Cincinnati Bengals. 9-8 is they still had a winning record without Joe Burrow a lot of that season. I think they're going to go over probably 11, 10 wins for sure. I have them in the playoffs as a certainty. And the last team, I had to do it to you guys. The New York Jets are going to make the playoffs. They've done too many good things not to be a playoff team. They've addressed the offensive line. Aaron Rodgers is going to come back. They brought him a new weapon. They have the number 10 pick in the draft. They could give him another weapon if they so desire. Or they could use that on another pass rusher to make that defense even more impressive. But, you could arguably say before the Texans traded for Stefon Diggs, that the Jets were having the best offseason out of any team. Now that's definitely shifted to Houston, but I think the Jets are right in there in terms of talent for sure with the Miami Dolphins to compete for that division. And we saw some hiccups from Tua. A lot of people were left unconvinced by his performances and how he played towards the end of the year when it got colder. You're not going to really get that with Aaron Rodgers. All you have to worry about is if these guys can stay healthy, Morgan Moses, Tyron Smith, Rodgers, Mike Williams, if they could all stay the majority of the season healthy, this team will not miss the playoffs for a lack of talent, that's for sure. It has to be injuries or just something else that went wrong in this season for them not to make it. They were 7-10 last year, like all these other teams, right on the brink. And all these teams either suffered an injury or were just very unlucky with the way some of these games turned out. I think that changes for most of them, and those are the 4 teams I have making it in the playoffs this year. I kept some fringe teams in there, like the Steelers. No bias there, I promise you. The Packers, I'm very high on. The Rams as well. I think they've shown a lot with that young talent. I'm sure they're going to stay in there. And I think the rest, definitely in the AFC, are hard to really take out of there. You're not going to take the Ravens, the Chiefs, Houston, definitely not. Cleveland was close, like I mentioned, just because I'm not convinced by Deshaun Watson yet. His health and his play when he is healthy hasn't convinced me. But I think their defense is too good. And those are the 4 teams in and the 4 teams out of the playoffs, in my opinion. As always, let me know what you guys think. If you think it's completely crazy, if you agree with me, I want to know it all in the live chat or in the comments whenever you watch this video. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on. We're going to go to the last break of the show, and on the other side, we're going to get to that Stefon Diggs trade, what I think of it, and just my overall reactions to this trade, and what it could mean for the Houston Texans going forward. So that's coming up right after this short break. Don't go anywhere. You're not going to want to miss that conversation.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here now on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. A huge move today in terms of just shaking everything up. Stefon Diggs goes to the Houston Texans. I mentioned it in our production meeting today, actually, when we were asked about it. Stefon Diggs, I was writing another topic for a show coming up today or the next day on Stefon Diggs, commenting on another comment that was left on a post by RG3. RG3 was basically talking about the chemistry between Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen. How much does Stefon Diggs bring to this team? How much does he impact Josh Allen and has impacted Josh Allen in how well he's playing, how well he will play, and how well he has played? And RG3, like most people would, has said that Stefon is significant to Josh Allen, has been pivotal to seeing the change, the maturity in Josh Allen. A comment was left on that, and basically they said that Stefon Diggs certainly adds to Josh Allen's success, but he's not essential to Josh Allen's success. That was yesterday, April 2nd, and Stefon Diggs saw that, and he commented to that comment. He said, just simply, you sure? Just those two words, you sure? In a question, rhetorical. That was yesterday. And now today he gets drafted. It's crazy how it all works out. I had to scratch everything and just react to this trade because, earlier in this show I mentioned how Stefon could be traded. There were those rumors, those murmurs that he wasn't really settled in. You turn on ESPN and just today you see Stephen A. or people on Get Up say that he's been wanting to get out of Buffalo. He's been unsettled recently. He's lost faith in them. That's the words coming out of Stephen A. I don't know how accurate that is. That's just what he said, what I saw. And if that turns out to be true, it all panned out in the way that this trade went down, actually happening. And going to the Texans is one thing, or getting traded is one thing. The fact that they sent him to the Houston Texans for Diggs went to the Houston Texans for a 2025 second-round pick. The Texans gave up a second-round pick that wasn't even theirs. They got that pick when they traded with the Minnesota Vikings for their 23rd pick. So that pick was already, just a free incentive to trade because it wasn't there. So they were just playing with that extra pick that they had, trading it for Stefon Diggs. And Houston in return gets Stefon Diggs along with a 2024 sixth-round pick and a fifth-round pick in 2025. It's crazy to know what Houston is getting or had to give up for Stefon Diggs. Only a second-round pick. Stefon Diggs is only 30, has been on the decline compared to what he was just 2 years ago. That's understandable. I might agree with you on that. But he's still, top 5, 7 for sure. I just off the top of my head, I can't name 7 receivers better than him, most likely. And the Texans now, I was already a big fan of them on the low, just keeping it to myself, to my friends, really liking them. I loved what I saw to C.J. Stroud. Tank Dell is going to be a great player for them. Unfortunately, he got hurt. Nico Collins broke through this year. Dalton Schultz is a reliable weapon for C.J. Their defense is very good, very solid. Christian Harris, I really didn't know about Christian Harris until those playoff games and how well he played in them, how impactful he was. He's a stud. They got Danielle Hunter to replace Jonathan Grenard. Will Anderson, the defensive rookie of the year, is on that team. All they need is really another corner to pair up with, I'm going to forget his name, Derek Stingley. And then, where is the weakness on this team? And even mentioned Joe Mixon. They brought in Joe Mixon as well from the Cincinnati Bengals. This team is it just reminds me of if I'm playing like a Madden franchise or something and I'm trading for all these players, bringing them to the team I'm playing with. It's crazy how all in DeMeco Ryans and their general manager just went all in with this team right now. It's awesome to see. Their general manager, Nick Caserio, it's great to see how committed they are to this team and how well they've just, forget everything else, forget all the negatives that could go wrong with this and everything else like that. They could just this could not turn out as well as people think, but they don't really care. They know that they have a stud quarterback in their facility. They believe in him enough to get all these weapons right now and not really wait on, this draft pick could do well or could this blow up later on. Forget all of that. They went out and got Stefon Diggs, and it's great to see Texans doing that and how well they've transitioned now so quickly into being what I think probably the second best team in the AFC right now. I don't think that's crazy to say. They have the quarterback, the pieces around them. The defense is one of the up-and-coming defenses. You can't put them up there yet, but compared to the second best team right now, if you want to say the Ravens or I don't even know, the Bengals maybe right now in the AFC, toe-to-toe, talent-wise, the Texans could go with any of those teams. Offensively, the most talented team and star-studded team that I saw in the entire league was the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, that's not really certain. That's not really a foregone conclusion that the Eagles are just best team offensively with what the Texans have been able to build up right now. And just on that topic, like I mentioned, how quickly they've transitioned from 2022 when they had Davis Mills as their quarterback and nobody knowing where this team was going to go. Nico Collins hadn't really broken out. It wasn't really going the way people thought it would. Just 2022, 2 years ago, you get C.J. Stroud, you get Tank Dell, Nico Collins looks great now. You bring in Joe Mixon, and just night and day, this team is not the same team it was before. DeMeco Ryans should get a lot of credit for how well he's coached them and developed C.J. Stroud. But this team is now really just jumped up into that tier with the Kansas City Chiefs. And you still favor the Chiefs right now. I'm not going to say they're the best team because the Chiefs have all the experience, have the best quarterback of this generation. But the Texans now, this coming season, it's really theirs to lose, to just throw away because you can't make an excuse now. Of course, everybody has to gel and come together and know how it all works out. But it's amazing what they've done right now. I'm still at a loss for words at how this all turned out. To trade him to the Texans is just mind-blowing. And what Diggs can still bring, I said before that he is admittedly on the decline right now. It's hard to see him get better than what he has been, but it's that experience and that attitude that he brings, I think, most of all, because the Texans are a young team. Tank Dell, a second-year player. CJ, a second-year player. Nico, not really that old. Joe Mixon's one of the older ones, and he's coming in. That's going to add a lot. But I think Stefon Diggs is bringing that experience, like I mentioned, like Joe Mixon, but he brings this other desire, I think, to really play in a Super Bowl, win a Super Bowl. You always see those pictures of Stefon Diggs watching the Chiefs celebrate, staying on the field and watching the confetti fall and just seeing that, being a motivation to go back with the Bills. But obviously that's dead now. That reality is dead, and he just wants to be in the big games. He wants to make it to a Super Bowl. Being traded to the Texans gives him the best chance at that, and I think he's going to help monumentally off the field as much as on the field. If you want to say on the field, he's going to be the second, third best receiver. That's all right. But he's going to bring that desire, that mentality that a young team needs, especially after coming off a first year where everything went right for them. Second year might have some struggles, might have some ups and downs. Having Stefon Diggs in there, who's really seen it all, have everybody calm down, keep a level head. That's just as big as anything that he could bring on the field, and he's going to bring a lot on the field. He's not just some washed-up receiver. He was the Bills' best receiver, and now he's on the Texans. I love, again, what this move means for the Texans. They're really solidifying themselves as one of the top teams. I'm excited to watch them. I haven't gotten into the Bills and how this could affect them. I'm going to definitely talk about that, if not tomorrow, definitely on Friday. But now there's more questions with the Bills. I saw somewhere on social media today that their top 3 receivers are, I'm going to forget one of their names. It's just crazy what they've gone from. Curtis Samuel's one of them. Matt Collins is another one. And then they have another one that I just forget his name, but he's been on the roster. And how quickly it's all gone from this Super Bowl window, still open because you have Josh Allen, Diggs is still there. It's hard to say now that if it's still open or it has definitely shut, because the talent on all over the roster, it's definitely not the same as it has been, where it's been one of the best talent-wise rosters built, and they still lost to the Chiefs. They still had struggles getting over the Chiefs and winning at home this past season especially. Now you ultimately get worse. They're really in some murky waters right now. But I'm going to get more into that on one of the shows coming up this week. But again, just to recap everything, the winner of this trade ultimately, if you can't tell by my reaction, is the Houston Texans. They've blown this whole offseason out of the water. And now, more pressure on them, on a young team. How that plays out, that's something that is certainly a question. But the way C.J. Stroud has played, the way he's led this team, I have no doubts that they're going to go as far as he takes them still, ultimately. And just based on how he played, I have all the confidence in the world in C.J. Stroud in those games into January, into December, to get this team as far as possible. They're doing it the right way, aggressive, not thinking twice about it. I love this move, and it's going to be great to see more. It adds more entertainment, more fun to these games. Seeing this all-star team on the field is going to be awesome. And just on that, the Texans definitely won the trade. And I'm not a Texans fan, I swear, but I just love seeing what they've done in the offseason. It's very fun to see them get better and just switch night and day in the course of 2 years, making it all look so easy where you have other teams that are still struggling. And that's just the NFL. Night and day brings you all these sort of stuff, sort of surprises, and you gotta love it. You gotta love it if you're a fan, and especially in my position, talking about it, it's extremely fun, and hopefully more things like this happen. But that's gonna do it for today's episode. A lot of excitement and a lot of groundbreaking news to add on today's episode. I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and please remember to follow, like, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow the network on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and X for more of the network's content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and more of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, make sure to check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel. On YouTube for YouTube Shorts that are posted daily. All the full recorded live shows are on there if you want to go back and rewatch a full show, as well as individual segment videos that are cut up from the live shows. If you missed one segment or want to go back and watch just a certain segment, they're all on there on both channels. Tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL conversations, more discussions around the best league in the world. With me, your host, Manny Maradiege. Thank you guys once again for joining me. I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't